Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for Managing Change for Team Leaders, a webinar presented by IT Masters and Sturt University. My name is Guy Coward. Shortly I'll introduce our lecturer, Kath Attree. Before I do so, some housekeeping I think is necessary. This webinar is being recorded, so if you have to leave or if you want a little bit of overtime and you have to leave, don't worry. We'll send an email to everyone who registered for this event with links to the slides that Kath's using, the recording of the webinar, and some interesting resources tomorrow, just to sort of wrap everything up. We quite clearly use Zoom for our webinars and encourage questions and the use of chat. We ask that you direct all questions relevant to course content to the Q&A section, and that you send all administration type questions, tech issues, or questions about IT Masters and Sturt University or the resources or studying with us to Hannah in the chat. You can chat with all of the panelists or to your fellow attendees as well, and you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you've opened the chat log. Personally, I'm very interested in hearing about your experiences in the last few months and what your stories are, how you've been managing so far. We'll have Q&A sessions at the end of the webinar, or a session at the end of the webinar, or if a question is particularly relevant, I'll interject during Kath's discussion. For those of you who aren't really familiar with IT Masters, first of all, welcome. We're a training organisation that exists as a partner to Sturt University, who we work with to develop and deliver a number of master's courses. We also market these courses on their behalf and hope that the best way to do that is give some of it away free. So we run some free short courses online. We've done that with Kath before, and have been doing a couple of sessions that are hopefully of assistance in these rather strange times, just to, that aren't really tied to any sort of particular study outcomes. So we hope you get something useful out of this one. And also that you're safe and well wherever and whenever you're listening. I'll let Kath take you through her experiences as she starts her lecture. I'll just say it's really nice to work with you again, Kath, after our short course. Could everyone please welcome Kath?
Okay, so hello everybody, and thanks for coming along. Wow, what a great diverse group. I've seen lots of different locations, quite a few from different parts of Africa, India, UK, Saudi, and of course WA, Canberra, New South Wales, so all over, really interesting. Thanks very much, lovely to have you here with doing the emceeing again, Guy, and Hannah managing the chat. It's great to work with you again. So my name's Kath Attree. I'm the course director at Sturt University, and I look after a suite of mostly postgraduate courses. So I look after the MBA, the Master of the Human Resource Management, and two really relevant courses for our current times, a graduate certificate in industrial relations, which I'm sure in other countries around the world, the industrial relations system in our current environment is really being challenged. And also a graduate certificate in organisational change, which is really geared around trying to help people deal with these sort of complexities in their workplace. And then we also have a graduate certificate, which can be an entry program into our MBA if needed. So I'll just move on to start the talk. I like to start my talks with a Dilbert, and I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with this. I love Dilbert because I think he makes management and leadership a little bit real. And so really this one's just saying, look, you know, there's millions of books on leadership. Lots of people delivering webinars, and I'm just one amongst the many. There's no real right way of doing things. You have to do what works best for you in your organisational context, and maybe even in your cultural context. My role is really just to help you think about some options, maybe think about some things you can try and do differently, or maybe even just to make you feel better about what you're doing and reassure you that what you're doing is okay. So having said that, let's just get started. So what we're going to cover off on today is just four brief points, but actually it's four very deep and contested points that we could spend weeks on. But anyway, we're going to look at engaging and motivating your dispersed team. It may not be dispersed, so we'll explore that. Trust, transparency, communication and culture. I think they're really crucial aspects about engaging and motivating teams, whether they're dispersed or within your organisation. How we can move from some reactive to proactive responses, and looking at a model of change management called Appreciative Inquiry, and then just finishing off with some suggestions around reflections, learning and building future resilience. So, Guy, we had a poll now to the group, didn't we, that we were going to try and get a bit of a sense of where you all are. So I'm quite interested in how long, whether you're working with dispersed and remote teams, and if so, how long, whether it's just recent. Interesting.
2 major groups so far, more than 5 years, and only since COVID-19 has sort of hit the scene. And only 6% haven't at all. A fairly solid block only in the last 5 years, though.
Okay.
So I've got 220 people viewing.
Yep.
165 of those now have answered, about 75%. So I reckon that'll give us enough.
Yep.
I'll end the poll and share it to all of your screens. More than 5 years, 40%. Only in the last 5 years, 20%. Only since COVID-19, so a matter of months, 34%, and 5% haven't at all been working with dispersed or remote teams.
Yeah, so it's pretty evenly split between those that have a fair bit of experience, 40%, and those that are only doing it recently, since COVID-19, 34%, and haven't at all. So, okay, but I'm hoping that whatever I've got to say is relevant regardless of your situation, but probably for those of you where it's new, you might get a little bit more out of it, hopefully. Okay, I might just move that off my screen and move on. All right, so some of you might have been at a presentation of mine before, and I have this bit of a Batman theme, but what I want to say is heroic leadership is dead. Now is not the time to be a lone superhero, if it ever was. You're not your team's saviour. And sorry, I just got to turn my heater off. And you can't do this alone. Particularly now in the case of COVID-19, you can't just swoop in and pick your team up and carry them to the other side. It's not possible. They've got to be part of the process, and they've got to be there with you, helping you navigate through the, white waters of change and be part of it. So that's what we're going to talk about, how you should engage your team and work with them. And I thought a really great example of somebody who, what happens when the person in charge falls over is Boris Johnson. I mean, how amazing is it that the UK doesn't have a deputy prime minister unless one's appointed? It's not a default. And so, and even if there is a deputy prime minister, that person doesn't automatically succeed the prime minister when the prime minister is incapacitated or resigns from leadership. So what an interesting system. And obviously it's a good example of, when things fall over, really, you do have to have a good mechanism in place, and having engaged your team as part of that is a good way of ensuring that things don't fall over if you suddenly get struck down by COVID-19. I did notice at least one person from the UK, so I'd be interested in see if they've got anything they want to contribute on that matter. But anyway, so what I like to say is that leadership is an action. So leadership is not about a person, it's an action that people bring to a process or a group or whatever. But it's what a group needs to achieve a shared purpose. So anyone can contribute to leadership. And the thing about leadership is you're never going to have everything that's needed to get people through a situation. So what you need to do is work together with a team of people to provide what's needed. And so you might be a good person on the strategic side, but you might not have great people skills, or you might be great on the people side, but you don't have that structure or, you know, ability to sort of like organize policy and procedure and structure and routine. So the whole idea around leadership is people work together and everybody contributes, but together what is needed in leadership is a whole load of dimensions. So there's a people dimension. It's about how people engage with each other. It's about listening and connecting in with people. There's a purpose in dimension. So why are you all in this organisation? What are you striving for? What are your values? What is the organisation's purpose? Simon Sinek would say, what is the why? So does everybody know what that why is? Do you all share it? Are you all agreeing? Do you have all goals aligned and working together? But there's also the safety dimension. So that's the structure, the policies, the procedures, the how we do things, the secure environment, so you know what the next steps are and who makes decisions and where decisions lie, and what's safe to do and how you act, because that's really important to leadership. And lastly, it's about, the strategic dimension is around how you act, how you balance that, how you learn from things, how you move forward. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of those dimensions and how that impacts on how you engage and motivate and connect with your staff in challenging times. Yes, I would say emotional intelligence would fit into the people dimension. Okay, the other thing I want to really talk about is this idea of the empowerment and the expanding pie of power. So I really feel that leadership is something to be shared and power is something to be shared. It's not something to be hoarded and kept by one person. And I like this concept of power and leadership not being like a pie, that if you carve it up and give somebody a piece, you've got less, but something that if you actually give it away, it expands and you have more. So by empowering others and involving people in leadership and decisions, you actually enhance your own leadership and you enhance your own power and your own skills and your own ability and your own capacity to deal with situations and scenarios. So I think that's a really important aspect to consider when you're thinking about your leadership skills and you're managing people through a difficult situation, is that you don't need to make all the decisions. You can empower other people to act and make decisions as well. Okay, so I think there's really 4 key components of engaging and motivating teams, whether they're dispersed or not. And I put the word distributed there, but probably dispersed is a better word. The first 2 are trust and transparency. And I think this whole concept is reflective of Douglas McGregor's theory X, theory Y approach to management. And Douglas McGregor actually published this theory in 1960. So this is 60 years ago. He put forward this idea that there's 2, this is seeing management as a dichotomy, which it is clearly not. There are so many nuances in management, but he said, he made generalizations that there's theory X type managers who believe that most people come to work for the money, are lazy, won't do work unless directed, they lack ambition, they don't like taking on responsibility, they don't care about the organisation and they resist change. Whereas theory Y managers view people as being driven by their jobs, seeking work, ambitious, keen to take on responsibility, committed to the organisation's objectives and are creative and will welcome change to some extent. Now, I think that nobody ever fits neatly in one or the other, but I think that what's really useful is if you view people as being, work avoiders, not caring about the organisation, then that really doesn't convey a very positive feeling towards your employees, and it doesn't really engage them. But if you trust them, you believe that they want to make a difference, and most people do, that they care about the values of your organisation, which a lot of people will, then they want to be part of the process. So when you engage and motivate your teams, trust is a really key component. And now when we're actually working, in our own homes, I think what we can't be doing is ensuring that people are there 9 to 5, because it's not possible. The world is now messy. I'm working at home with my husband and child in the same space, and I keep getting interrupted, and I've had to structure my day so I do chunks of time where I might do 2 hours and have a break and then come back to it and then do a few hours, because it's just not working around the family. So that idea of like monitoring people by their hours and minutes that they put into the job is really not very effective. You've got to trust people to do the job, not worry about the time that they're doing it. And as long as they're meeting the goals and achieving the normal benchmarks, then you shouldn't worry too much about it. If they're not, then it's a conversation obviously that you have to have. It's like, okay, it's been 4 weeks now and your productivity I've noticed is about 70%. Is there anything we can do to make it easier for you to enhance your productivity, or do you want to reduce your fraction for a few weeks? Would you like to take some time off? Those sort of conversations, I think, being empathic are important, but your connection with people should be around trusting them to do the work, and if they're not, you've got the metrics and you've got the information to start a conversation. But also think about it. Is it worth having that conversation? Can you give the person some slack for 4 weeks if you know in 2 or 3 weeks we're going to come back to work and the situation will be changed? So obviously, depending on your particular environment and how likely things are going to change will make a difference. So in New South Wales, our children aren't going back to school until the 11th of May, whereas I know in WA they've gone back. I think they've gone back anyway. And trust.
Chat in there.
Yeah. Trust is a two-way street. It is, and it does take time to develop, and people will abuse that trust. That does happen. But I think overall trusting people until they prove you wrong, and then developing strategies to say, right, okay, I gave you this latitude and obviously it's not working, so we're going to have to put in some different mechanisms to make sure that you're able to get your work done. How can we work together? Let's identify some strategies.
Cool.
Okay. Anything else that we could pull out the chat that I should be aware of?
Speaking about lead, maybe not chat, but we'll go for a question. Kavita's asked, interested in your thoughts on why so many leaders, especially during turbulent or uncertain times, find it difficult to expand the pie of power. Wonders if they're feeling insecure or threatened or have difficulties controlling the mob.
Yeah, and sometimes it's that top-down pressure as well. They're scared, they're worried. It could be all sorts of reasons, but it is sometimes, I've worked with people who are bottlenecks. They control everything, and not necessarily difficult or nasty people, but just people that want to be the center of the decision making, and it's really ineffective. I don't know, scared, worried, usual way of operating. I guess if we can't change them, at least you can operate in a way that's better than them. Is all I can say. Try and manage upwards. Try and offer them to take off some of the responsibility off them. Doesn't always work, but yeah, it's difficult.
Gee, thanks.
I think, but the other thing about employees is you should be offering them support and direction, not monitoring and supervision. So having a conversation with you, how are you going? What's your pain points? How can we deal with this? Is there any way around it? Looking at those aspects of trying to give them balance, and flexibility, but also making sure that goals are being met within the organisation. So clear direction and good communication are really important. Connecting in one-on-one, but not overdoing it. Like if you normally only meet once a fortnight with members of your team on a one-on-one, then, you know, ask them, do you want me to meet more regularly? Do you want to have a half-hour chat once a week? Are you okay, or should we just continue our fortnightly one? Here's my number in case you want to get in touch with me. Being available, being open, but having that communication. Don't assume just because you used to have a fortnightly meeting with them, that's okay to just continue. I think it's good to have the conversation about, you know, do you want more or do you want less? How are you going? Would you like me to check in? Would you like support, assistance? You know, what's happening? I think that's really important to connect and engage with people at this time. But it is very important that staff do understand the responsibilities and any implications of their actions. So particularly if your organisation is struggling, without sort of like trying to put the pressure on them, it's like, you know, being open, having an open conversation. Okay, you know, things are really struggling. We need people to be able to deliver on this. Are you able to? Do you need support? You know, what can we do to work this through? Can you work with any of your colleagues? Those sort of things. There has to be clarity. They have to know what they're expected to do, but it has to be reasonable in these situations and clear, but providing them with support. The other thing I think is that honesty and openness are quite important. Obviously, there are sometimes when you can't tell them everything, but being really transparent about what's happening, what the situation is in. I mean, at the university, within the first couple of weeks, we had our Vice-Chancellor say to us, this is where we are at. This is the amount of money we expect to be in shortfall. This is likely the scenario that will happen in the future. And these are the ways we're addressing it. And I think that that was really important for our organisation. And it will continue to be important to get those regular updates. So being open, honest, but doing it with humanity and trying to be aware of people's concerns, I think is very important. I've already talked about being accessible, so having people, allowing people to contact you, but also other ways, so email, text, Zoom meetings, whatever. Let them see your diary. So I know of somebody, a colleague of mine or a friend of mine who works in a different organisation. Her boss, his daughter had an operation, and the daughter was exceedingly ill after the operation, and the boss actually had to go and look after her for a couple of weeks because the daughter couldn't do things like bathe herself. But she didn't tell her team where she was. So because she had this extra responsibility, she was taking time getting back to people. People didn't know what they were doing wrong. Why was she not communicating? That was making them extra anxious and nervous. So you know, like this person was trying to hide from their team the fact that, you know, she had these extra responsibilities. But if she'd been honest and open, people would have been more understanding, but also it would have alleviated a lot of concerns. So I think letting yourself be human in this time is really important as well. So to share some of your own challenges that you're experiencing, like me, and I'm finding it hard to have my daughter at home and monitor her schooling, and have her interrupting me to read me what she's written every 5 minutes. You know, those things I think I'm happy to share those with people. So I think it's about being honest and open in this time. But regular communication, a weekly update. So our head of school at the university here, she gives us, on a Monday, she gives us an update. This is what I've been doing the last fortnight. These are the things that have been the priorities in the various meetings I've been at. This week we'll be focusing on this, and this is where we're up to. And, you know, here are the key points for people to be aware of in terms of, you know, whatever the timeline is or various things. That regular once a week communication has been incredibly great for everybody to know what's going on, where they are. You know, it just means that there's clarity and there's sharing, and people feel included and part of the process. So I think regular communication, whether it's at a once a week email, whether it's your regular meetings, but maybe even just, you know, occasional just check in to say, how are you going? Are you okay? Is everything all right? You know, let me know if it's not. So those sort of things. The other thing I think that's really important is you need to be transparent about your own values and principles. What drives you? What's important to you? So people are really clear about what matters. And I've already talked about being authentic. Okay, anything that I should respond to from the...
There's a really interesting comment from Sharon or Sharon, who's been finding the demands from multiple channels challenging as people assume you're available to respond immediately. As they say, bings and bongs, Yammer, Teams, Outlook, emails, videos, Skype, texting, I'd add Zoom. Yeah, a really interesting point. I guess that comes down to honesty and openness.
Yeah, I think maybe that's part, no, there could be a number of things too, like people are overdoing the communication. So that's why it's good to have a conversation with your team. How often and how do you want to communicate? The other thing is maybe people are feeling a bit isolated, so they're wanting to kind of like ring in or check in, or, you know, where they might normally go to morning tea together, they're missing that. So we've been having weekly just coffee mornings and sharing information. So on Wednesday, we brought to it, one truth and one lie, and people had to guess what the truth was and what the lie was, and everybody had a turn. And it was just, it was just a half hour to 40 minutes where we had the permission not to work and just to engage and connect. If, for example, you would normally have morning tea with your colleagues and you find that they're annoying you and keep contacting you and buzzing you, maybe you could say to them, hey, like I prefer it if you email, but why don't we schedule like a little catch up twice a week or something like that where we can just chat? Maybe that's a way. Oh, I love the baby photo option. That's a really good idea. So I do agree there is too much at times, and that's my thing with my daughter's school a bit. I'm like, I'm not going to keep looking at what's on the Facebook page. I'm just going to let her do her thing as long as she's doing something. So yeah, there are, it can be a little bit overwhelming at times, and that is about learning the balance. And I think having that conversation with the team about what's working is a really good idea.
Mm. Yeah, there's a couple of interesting questions in the Q&A as well about, I guess, human nature and people that are working in situations where perhaps they feel like their CEO is less qualified, and sort of going back to that earlier question about why people are a bit reluctant to share power. Interesting, Vali brings in sort of cultural, I guess, vectors to, for lack of a better word. So what happens when the culture of the organization does not support openness and honesty, like in most developing nations, for example, is Vali's example.
Yeah. So obviously cultural differences will make a difference, and a lot of my theories and discussions and knowledge comes from a Western context. So you have to work in your own cultural context. If we look at trust and transparency, look, I worked in Asia. I did trust the people that I work with, and I also did have to share the leadership because I had to take them with me to meetings with people, like with other parties, because I didn't understand the subtext, so I had to, bring people along, and we'd have a conversation. And on the way there, I'd ask them what I need to know about this situation, and on the way back, I'd ask them what really happened there. So, like I think there are various ways to do it within your own cultural context. It's difficult because every cultural context is different, so you have to look at your own. But I think increasingly people do. Honesty, ethics and values are part of every culture, so it matters what your culture prioritizes there. Now, what was the other things that people mentioned that I might have glossed over, Guy?
No, that works quite well.
Okay.
We'll probably have a fairly decent Q&A session at the end. There's lots of questions coming in. And
there's a question from, I think it's Mubalama, who says, what to do when people don't finish their tasks on the due date and everyone's working from home, no physical control. So I think that, you do have people who do miss due dates, and whatever culture it is. I work with a colleague where I've got a paper due at the end of May, and I'm like, oh, and I've got to get her to sort of put her input, but I know she's going to drag the chain and push it out. So I'm just trying to think about strategies to manage her, and I'm going to say, I mean, obviously I'm in a position of power where I'm the lead author, so I can say, look, I need you to respond by this date. If not, I'm sending off. But maybe having a conversation, okay, you didn't meet the deadline. The implications of you not meeting the deadline is that this person now has to do this, I have to do this, this happens, the client is unhappy, you know, making people understand the wider consequences of the not meeting the deadline, but then saying, how can we work to make sure this doesn't happen in the future? Do you need to check in with me to check in with you more regularly? Do you need support? What are the barriers? You know, I'm trying to tease out that is what I think what a lot of people do is they avoid conflict. But you can actually manage conflict very constructively by having a plan about how you're going to do it. Not being accusing, but going in with an offer of support, saying, you know, taking that approach like, let's work together to work out how we can avoid this happening in the future, because it looks badly on you and it looks badly on me, and, you know, we can't let this happen. So that's what I would do anyway. Okay, engaging and motivating your team. Let's move on to that. So we've talked a lot about communication. I've already addressed a lot of this, but the clear, regular and honest, I think, is really important. But two-way, it can't be all just from you. So try and think of ways to get them to participate. And inevitably what happens if you've got a Zoom meeting, you've got the people who always talk, and you've got the people who don't. So can you rotate who gives a brief? So one of the people was saying they have a Zoom meeting every morning and then a Zoom meeting every afternoon. Frankly, I think that's a bit of overkill, but if that's how your team normally operates, then that works for you. But if you've got that Zoom meeting every morning, maybe you can say, right, well, let's rotate who gives the update first and take it through, or rotate who gives an update, rotate who hosts the meeting, you know, allow other people to have a voice, so that you can hear a variety of perspectives, because if you just hear the same people all the time, you might be missing things. So listening, and then if people aren't engaging, maybe ringing them up and having that one-on-one. Just say, hi, I've just noted you're in a few meetings, you haven't really contributed. I just want to check you're okay. Is everything going well? Are there any suggestions you want to make? Is there anything you'd like to see improve? You know, is there anything I can do? And that way you're just checking in and trying to stop maybe things getting out of hand before you're aware of them. Okay, some people are saying they have rotation, that's good. And people are talking about some great online tools for monitoring progress and stuff. And yeah, there are some excellent tools. So yeah, we talked about formal and informal meetings, a variety of mediums, so the face-to-face, email, the Skype or Slack or whatever tools you're using. But yeah, maybe there's a way of trying to manage the overkill as well. So if you're finding it a bit annoying with people keep interrupting you, can you put your do not disturb on for a little bit? Those sort of things, I think it's important, particularly as a team leader. So sometimes you have to do planning and you have to have that time where you're not interrupted. But make it clear to people, I'm going to have a do not disturb between this time and this time every day, or between these times. My calendar's open so you can see when I've got meetings. You know, I'm really welcome you to send me an email if you can't get me, or if you really need to speak to me urgently, send me a message and I'll ring you back. So I think you have to make it work the best way you can. But the other thing about communication, you need to clearly communicate the direction, the vision, the issues and the policy. So where is the organisation going? What's happening? What are you hoping to achieve? How are you going to get through this? What are the main problems that are arising? Where's the policy around what needs to be done? So for, in particular, things like working from home policies or work health and safety policies, because they're a big issue in Australia, obviously, with people in the home office. All of those things, policies around leave, policies around personal leave, anything like that. So you need to be pointing people in the right direction of where to get information if it's important, as well as, you know, how to deal with the COVID-19 situation if that's the issue for you. Okay. So, and then obviously the culture that you have matters in terms of how people engage and are motivated, and whether they feel like they're, you know, working well in this new environment. So if you normally have an inclusive culture where everybody are together and they sort of like, there's a lot of connection and people are valued and included in everything, then you've got to work to sort of recreate that in some way, so through some informal get-togethers. But if your culture is adaptive, then maybe you can have something like a Trello or some other software where you can use things, or maybe not Trello, but some different types of software where you can look at ways of putting up new ideas, trying to create different approaches, throwing new ideas into the box, you know, having some sort of mechanism for brainstorming. Achievement cultures and consistency cultures are probably not the best cultures for this rapid changing environment, which is highly unpredictable. But I guess an achievement culture is basically more suitable for a stable environment where customers are specific, and then you get competition, and you know, it's about driving to get business and things like that, whereas now you've got to be probably a little bit more adaptive around changing the way you direct a business. But I suppose if you can combine achievement with adaptiveness, so bring in some adaptiveness around the achievement culture, I think that that would work well. So you probably need to examine your culture and think about what sort of culture your organisation has. Is it one where people are valued, the contributions are included, as everybody's part of the team? Is it one where, you know, people who succeed are who get big sales or who win big contracts are valued? Or is it one where innovation and changing is really valued? Or is it one where rigidity and conformance is valued? Because if it's rigidity and conformance, then it's a bit of a problem, because you're probably going to have to change things around a lot for this new situation, and you've got to bring in new ways of doing things. So that's going to be a challenge to work with. So looking at your culture and looking at what things can be highlighted and what things can be perhaps maintained is quite important, because people will feel comfortable with what the status quo is. So if consistency is your issue, your culture, then you can say, right, we have this way of doing business, and we want to try and maintain consistency and stability, but we need to have some change. So let's look at what we've got and what can be slightly adapted, and work with it that way. But if you're used to sort of throwing in new ideas and looking at new ways of doing things, then you're in a good situation for the COVID-19 world. The other thing I think is bringing people back to the why. What is the organisation's purpose? What is it striving to achieve? Can it still do that? Can it still do that in the new world? And I've seen some really great innovative examples of people still trying to do a great thing. Like retail has been really challenged in most countries, I think, because of the COVID-19 situation. And what I'm seeing is, particularly on Facebook and Instagram, is that people are being really innovative about the way they're sort of developing their product mix and providing different things. And the people that are doing that are being more successful. So there's a few local cafes around Bathurst where I am based, and they're looking at things like boxing up Mother's Day cakes and you know, with some little teas and a cup or something like that as a present. Or they've got, instead of, you know, dine in, they've got, you know, the daily soups or the daily lunch specials that people can, you know, pick up. Or they have just little things where they're trying to drive that people coming back to their site and into their store in a situation where they're not getting the same sales, so that they can at least survive and get through this situation. So they're still true to what they do. They deliver, you know, great food and great cakes and a great sort of, I guess, visual and culinary experience, but they're trying to do it more in their virtual space than the physical space instead. The other thing is, I think, in terms of your culture, is modeling best practice. So you have to be what you want people to be. If you want people to be trusted, you have to be trustworthy. If you want people to communicate and connect and engage, you have to do that. So you can't be the person at the meeting that doesn't have your camera on if you want everybody to have their camera on. If you're trying to foster collaboration and connection, then you have to be part of that. If you want people to be transparent, then you have to be transparent. You have to show your diary and your commitments. And I think you also have to show that you're human as well. But you should also celebrate when people do things well, reward the efforts and the behaviours that you want to see. If people are coming up with new ideas that are able to be enacted or delivered, then you know, that should be celebrated. So, and when I say reward efforts and behaviours, it's just by saying, fantastic, that's a great idea, thanks for all the hard work, or thanks for everybody for being consistent and putting in your effort, thanks for coming up with a new way to work around that policy, thanks for doing this. It's about just being appreciative of the team and what they're doing and how they're changing and what efforts they're putting in. Okay, so if we just go back to this whole idea of the theory X, theory Y, you can see that, you know, when it comes to attitude, the theory X approach is if people don't like work and find it boring, then they avoid it, so that's the attitude. But the theory Y approach is if people do like work and they're interested in it, they will enjoy it, and they'll find a way to enjoy it and be proud of what they do. If you have you know, you don't have trust in your staff and you feel like you have to coerce them, then that's what will happen. But if you empower them and, you know, give them support, then they can direct themselves. If you can give them some responsibility, but give them support and guidance and framework, and tell them that they can make decisions, but if they want to run anything by you, you're happy to be available, then people will, I think, flourish under that situation, and then they will be motivated to do well in the role, and they'll be a creative and those sort of things. So I think we need a bit of a theory Y approach, a belief in people, and I also think that obviously in this situation, when we look back at our contributions for leadership, this communication and culture is pretty much the people, the purpose, and probably the safety dimension. All right, now I'm just looking to make sure I haven't missed a poll. Have I missed a poll? I have, haven't I? So
we'll just go with it now, you reckon?
Yep, let's go with it now.
Alrighty, what are your major challenges at the moment? Employee productivity, employee engagement, communicating with my team, knowing the next step, or all of the above? Knowing the next step, perhaps unsurprisingly, is the big one at the moment.
It's really, and that's what makes us nervous and anxious and everything like that. It's really challenging.
That security dimension.
Exactly. Where are we? We want to be safe. We want to know where we are, what's next.
Oh, also, Kath, thanks heaps for reminding me it's Mother's Day soon.
Yes.
It's first Sunday of May, is it?
Oh gosh, I have to look at it. Always conflicts with my daughter's birthday.
I'm sure it'll be in the chat.
Yep.
All right, so we've got 70% voted.
Okay, knowing the next step.
40% knowing the next step, 24% is next biggest with all of the above. And then we have, you know, between 10 and 15% for communicating employee engagement and productivity.
Okay, I think that's good because only 12% have that problem of productivity, and maybe 14% finding the problem around engagement, but that's to be expected in our challenging environment. And communicating with only 10%, I think that's really good. So obviously people are finding ways to connect in and communicate. And all of the above, obviously, yeah, so it does matter. So, you know, it is a bit overwhelming at times. Knowing the next step, well, I mean, I can't solve your problems, but I'm going to put some suggestions forward on knowing the next step now.
We'll test that in the Q&A session at the end. There's a few.
Yeah. Okay, so just to sort of like give you a bit of theory behind some of this. So there's a bundle of different theories of leadership, as I alluded to earlier, but some of the more current and more popular ones these days are this idea of servant leadership. And so it's the idea that a servant leader gives away power, ideas, and recognition and credit. So, just to kind of continue the Batman theme, Michael Caine, who plays Alfred Pennyworth, he is kind of like the servant leader for Batman because he empowers Batman, he gives his ideas, he helps him, he supports him, he, you know, is there to sort of make sure that Batman flourishes. So a servant leader places value and trust in people, encourages trust, shares power, recognises and supports others, and encourages creativity and innovation. And that's really useful in a very disrupted environment because you need collaboration, innovation and creativity in this current environment so that you can identify new ways of doing things and find a way through these challenging times. Okay, so the last little bit is really around identifying some proactive responses. So you would have had your reactive responses. So, you know, you put up your safety measures, you put in some mechanisms for distancing. People moved and worked from home. They had to set up the home desk. You've done all that. And so I think, you know, you've got people, I presume it's different in different countries around the world, but most people have been 2 to 4 weeks into it. So you're starting to sort of, you know, get on top of all that initial reaction. So now you need to move to the proactive approach. And to do this, this uses a particular approach of change management that is called Appreciative Inquiry. And it's about focusing in on what works well. And so in your teams, maybe you can ask them, what are the really good parts? You know, like because it is great for people to vent and complain. I've been complaining a little bit about my situation, but what's working well? What are we doing really well? Well, we adapted really quickly. We put through this amazing change. We've brought in these new screens now that, so if we're looking at the image down the bottom, screens now, which will mean that, you know, we're better protected against any future viruses. You know, it's generally going to be better. So talk to your teams about what are the really good things that we've learned out of this. What have we learned about our ability to work together as a team? What are, you know, the things that we've done really well? What's our successes? What are our advantages over our competitors? How can we capitalize on our strengths? What new ways of operating have we discovered that are actually an improvement on our old practices? Now, some bundle of organisations that might have said, oh no, we can never go to cashless, that have gone to cashless. But other things like I think that are quite interesting. So, you know, the new Perspex screens that we see everywhere, they're actually really good for health generally. And then there's this little example from Amazon with the delivery boxes, which I thought was so cute. That a friend of mine put up who's currently in the US. So in these delivery boxes now, there's these little cutouts that you can actually cut out and you can give your child to colour in and they can make these 3D little, you know, flowers. So it's sort of, you know, something for the families at home, something new and different for them to do, which I thought was quite a sweet little touch from Amazon. And it just was something, you know, it didn't, I would doubt it cost them significantly more to do that, but it you know, helped them engage with their customer and it gave a nice feeling towards the brand and things like that. So there's some great ideas that are coming out of this that I think are really worth celebrating. So the Appreciative Inquiry model is really around that whole thing about focusing on the positive. And I think we really need to do this because it has been such an enormous challenge. Let's look at what we've done well. So choose a positive as a focus of inquiry. What were the great moments? What were the great learnings? What are the great things that we've got? You know, what are the really things that we need to celebrate? Even if it's just small, like some of the people said, is that we've managed to work from home without a huge loss of productivity. We've managed to all sort of quickly relocate our workplaces, which shows we can do all sorts of extraordinary things. You know, share the stories of what's working well and how things are going well, even if it's just stories about how am I managing my day. How am I splitting up my day? What's working well for me in terms of balancing my work, you know, or what's working well for me in terms of like time out and dealing with the stresses, you know, have I tapped into any, you know, great online physical exercise programs or something like that, anything like that, where they can share and focus on the positives, work out what you actually enjoying, what you're doing well, how does that fit with the organisation, its direction, its values and things like that. Bring it back to your organisation values as well. So create a shared image. What, right, like, okay, what can we take forward from this? So there you're actually starting to see the future. These are great, like we've really got these great ideas, we've got these new ways that we can do business. How can we look at integrating them in the future? You know, what are our ideas that we can throw on the table? Start brainstorming to think about new ways of doing things. And I think that that is really the way of, you know, starting to take control of ownership of the what's coming next thing. So you actually start to have some proactive and positive approaches. Okay, so I'm here. I might just quickly, how are we going for time? We've got 7 minutes. So I might just say, what examples have people been noticing of organisations doing things differently? Oh, okay, I can see local manufacturing of products. There's been organisations that have totally switched their manufacturing processes. So in Bathurst, there's a company that makes gin, and so they're just making hand sanitizer now because obviously that's high alcohol based. Yeah, so.
There's countries that have been forced to completely revamp their production methods as well, haven't they?
It's going to what people are saying.
Oh,
okay, carrying folders. I love that. Submitting documentation to our auditors electronically instead of carrying folders around the office. Isn't that a marvellous, Scott? Like, how simple is that? And time saving. Telehealth, I'm so happy that telehealth is becoming much more acceptable. Why couldn't it have been done before?
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting question. Like, when everything goes back, are we going to?
I think we should do it. Like, telehealth to me is a godsend. Particularly, you know, because I live in a regional area where sometimes to go and see a specialist is an hour there and an hour back. That's 2 hours out my day. Telehealth would be so much easier. Online delivery, cashless operations, takeout when it did not exist. See, all these amazing things like that have been mobilised over 1,000 contact centre agents to work from home. See, Tanya, how awesome you are. And all that's going to be on your CV, isn't it? Like, yep, help with the, yep, did all these things. Like, start writing your CVs, people.
Tanya, do you think you'll change them back, Tanya? By the way, once it's an option, or do you think that, you know, it was a change that was necessary and just people were perhaps a bit reluctant to do it before? Working through it now.
Yeah, and I see Renee must be in orange, just saying lots of restaurants doing family meal specials, which is fantastic because families are eating together more. Yeah, and also, I mean, despite all that cooking, you know, home stuff on Instagram, I certainly haven't embraced the kind of like, you know, home goddess aspect. So I'm quite happy to get a takeaway. Yep, so, and Anita saying that she's hoping many changes are going to stay. Allowing employees to take monitors home, yep. Telehealth, yep. Vehicle manufacturers making parts now making ventilators and medical equipment, and they wouldn't have done that. And hello, Tony. Yeah, they wouldn't have done that, would they? And you know, they would have bemoaned the loss of the automobile industry in Australia. Now suddenly they've got this great opportunity to do something differently, and it's COVID-19 that threw them into that. So some really awesome examples of how society has been so innovative and so flexible and so, you know, able to cope. So I think, you know, we all need to pat ourselves on the back. So go after this or tomorrow and start thinking about all the things you've learned and all the new skills and achievements that you've clocked up, because these are the learnings that you're getting from this. So I think it's really useful to reflect on this process. Obviously, while you're going through it, it helps as a leader to be calm, clear and positive, no matter how much you're feeling churned up inside. To try and be empathic and flexible, because let's face it, this is bloody devastating for a lot of people in society, and it's really challenging for us too. Be human, allow yourself to fail. Like, it's okay to say, well, I stuffed up and I got that wrong. You know, I thought that might work, but it's clearly not. Let's brainstorm some other way of doing it. People will respect that if you own up to your mistakes and you recognize your own deficiencies or, you know, wrong decisions, better than if you pretend that it was all perfect or it didn't happen. I think, and so that's about reflecting on what worked and what didn't. But what skills did you gain? What do you know now? What do you do differently? Can you get some 360 feedback? Is there any way of setting up, say, a Google survey for the team to say, ask a few pertinent questions? How's my leadership? What would you like to see more of? Communication, less communication? Would you like one-on-ones? If you've got a large team, so it can be anonymous, otherwise ask people. They might be quite happy to give you it directly. But, you know, just, I think it's really important just to reflect and say, okay, maybe some things didn't work, but some things really did, and here's what I did well. And give yourself a pat on the back. I think it's always useful, at least, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, to reflect, and start with reflecting on what are 3 things I really did well today or this week. And write them down, because they're going to be really important for your resumes in the future. Okay, so I think that's, it's 8:29, we're getting to the end. So my summary is: don't do it alone, engage your team, share, communicate, celebrate, be authentic, transparent and open, trust in others, focus on the positives, reflect on the learnings and the skills gained, breathe, that's what I keep telling myself, and grow. And of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So I just like to take the opportunity to say, if you are thinking about further study, we have some great programs here at Sturt University, or IT Masters. There's graduate certificates, which are 4 subjects in things like managing change, industrial relations, a generalist one in commerce, there's ones in IT, project management, a range of different ones. So please have a look at our courses, and if you're interested, you can send me an email, get in touch with Guy, or ask any questions.
Yeah, we'll give you our contact details tomorrow, everyone. We've got a few questions as well, so if you can hang around.
I can hang around. But if people can't, thank you very much for coming along, and good luck.
Here we go. Well, we'll get to Karen's question maybe at the end. It's about, that's someone who has completed some CSU work and is interested in what to do next. But we'll just go from the top, I guess. Peter asked about your 4 dimensions. And was wondering about the safety dimension, why that's not termed culture. I was wondering if perhaps, you know, culture would sort of be an umbrella for all of the dimensions. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so culture is really about what you prioritize. So your culture could prioritize people, or it could prioritise safety. So if you're an auditor, I think the priority is highly in the safety dimension, because an auditor's role is to check everything's by the book, you know, policies and procedures are followed, you know, rules and regulations are followed. Whereas if you're perhaps in a human resource discipline, or you know, a sort of social services discipline, then the people dimension might be highlighted more. So culture will prioritise some dimensions over others. But all organisations need all dimensions.
Thank you. Sharon's asked for a specific example of how your team meets, and then gives her example of having a quick morning meeting in Zoom of about 15 minutes, where everyone briefly describes their plans for the day, and a second in the afternoon, which is sort of a drop-in one where there's a lot of chat about, you know, a particular job and a bit of a social catch-up as well.
Yeah, it doesn't, I think it's about what works for your team. For me, I wouldn't do that, that's too much, because we, as academics, we tend to operate quite independently. We get to, and in other roles where I've had, so last year I had a role which was on the professional side of the university, and so I had regular meetings once a fortnight with my team leaders, and so I wouldn't change that, I'd just continue that, unless they wanted it more regularly. But I always had the thing like, you know, let's have our formal meeting. If you ever need to just check something with me, just, you know, send me an email or give me a phone call if it's urgent. And if I can't answer you straight away, I'll ring you back. I think having a structure around those regular meetings too is quite good sometimes. So if that works for her and her group to have that early morning check-in, if that's what they regularly would have done, and even if it's not what they regularly would have done, if that's what's working for the team, I think you've got to go with whatever you think is best for your group.
Great. Just a couple of quick ones. What's your opinion about micromanagement in leadership? Could this be allowed? If yes, when? Is there ever a context where it's a good idea?
Okay, I'm sure somebody could convince me of one.
Well, as you say, it depends on the situation.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the micromanagement.
Generally noted.
I don't think it's necessary. I think you cause bottlenecks. I think that it's showing a lack of trust in your team. But I don't know every single context.
Yeah. Tough one. Wajud's asked, what if one of your employees is affected by COVID-19? What can I do as a leader in that moment?
Sorry, say it again, please, Guy.
What if one of our employees is affected by COVID-19? What can
employees.
I do as a leader? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so your employees. Okay, I think you probably would have some organisational policy around that, but if you don't, then you should develop some. You should be developing some. So brainstorm with your team or with your colleagues on the same level about what should be the things. Now, number one, they shouldn't come to work. Obviously, usually there's a national guidelines around what has to be done. So in Australia, if somebody's got COVID-19, they have to stay home for 2 weeks. Can they work? Well, they may be able to work. So does that mean that they can continue their job? They may well be able to. That depends on how sick they are. Obviously, Boris thought he was going to be able to work, but he wasn't because he got incredibly sick. So I think you need to look at your national guidelines and your organisational policy if you have one. If you don't, then I would say be using your national guidelines as a guide to establish your organisational policy.
And good luck, and thank you.
Do not drink bleach, good idea. Don't tell your employees to drink bleach.
Well, we got another 10 questions to go, so I wonder if maybe, Hannah, you could open up the Q&A, and just any that come after the next sort of 30 seconds or go, we'll dismiss those ones and just whip through the rest. We'll just get to Karen's now. I have completed CSU Organisational Change qualification and seeking more opportunities to learn more about Appreciative Inquiry.
Certification. I don't know about certification. There may be a lot of places do have certification, Karen. It's just one theory, appreciative inquiry. So one of many change management approaches. I think personally, I like it. It resonates with me. But I also think some of the process-based ones also helpful because they give you a toolkit. So, for example, ProSci or ADCAR, that's useful because it does give you a toolkit. But I think, you know, a toolkit that can be used with an approach that, you know, focuses on the positive is a great way to enact change management. We have rewritten our change management qualification, Karen, and so we're actually going to bring in a second change subject, and we're going to make both change subjects mandatory, which wasn't the case when you did it. If you wanted further study, I'm happy to chat to you about that, but other than that, I mean, I guess there's lots of industry certifications that you could look at. Some of them can be quite expensive though. And it's how much use you get out of them, I don't know. So that's, say, Ali says, I work with a volunteer run community, oh, it's been hard. Yeah, and I think that's fair enough, Ali, because they're all worried about their own safety, and possibly if they're working with vulnerable people, it's really challenging. I don't know, is there, can you put out some calls to community about how they might be able to help? Because people in the community have been doing some really great things and coming up with some innovative ideas here in Australia. There's been whole stuff around supporting veterans that's happened. So I don't know, maybe you can brainstorm a few things. It'd help if I knew what sort of volunteer run organisation, but it's hard to, so I don't really know the answer there. How this theory works for businesses who can't operate in work from home model. Well, I think the whole thing about communicating with your team, trusting them, empowering them, engaging them, helping them understand the why, wholesale trading business, they all matter whether you're, and they're all relevant whether you're dispersed or in the same building, I think. So there's some of those things that would be relevant for you, whether you're working in the same physical location or whether you're not, I'm hoping. Resolving an issue via one-on-one still entirely is what's going on. Things, that gets the things in a strong grip on settle time. Okay, so I think what Archie is saying is, like, sometimes if you're having an issue with a team member then and you're trying to resolve it, everybody else knows what's happening. But everybody else knows what's happening anyway. And if you're not doing anything to resolve it, they know that you're not doing anything to resolve it. So no action is action. So it's about, like, you could probably Google things like dispute resolution or conflict resolution for some tips around how to improve your ability to handle a difficult situation. But I think that it's all often just about, the advice is always focusing on the behaviour, what's wrong, what's not happening, not the personality or the person, and being really, really clear around what expectations are and what minimum standards are, and asking people to be part of the process on how to get to that. So, like, saying to them, right, here are the issues. When you behave like this, the impacts are this. How can we prevent this from happening in the future? I have one question: how to coordinate when there are more than one leaders for the same team at the same level of hierarchy? Yes, very difficult, Narav. And so it is, again, having those conversations about maybe having a team approach. So it is quite challenging when sometimes you say something to somebody and somebody else says something, and that person has two bosses and they don't know who they need to pay attention to. So is there a way of going to that person and saying, oh, I noticed that I said this to so-and-so and you said this to so-and-so. How can we work together to make sure that we're delivering a consistent message? Let's identify some things. What do you want to be happening? And this is what I want to happen. Where's the middle ground? The problem is people don't have conversations, and that's actually one of the big failings of leaders is that they don't have difficult conversations. They avoid it. And so that's when you avoid it is when it goes wrong. Being brave, having a conversation instead of stewing over it for weeks and weeks and weeks and, you know, trying to sort of like deal with it some other way. I think it's really important to try and, you know, address the issue in a very constructive, non-aggressive, proactive way. But then, of course, culturally, who knows, that could be not the right thing to do. Okay, agile projects are focusing on face-to-face meetings. What do you suggest to solve these inconvenient situations? Well, why does it matter to be face-to-face meetings, Hajar? Can't you just do it on Zoom? You're virtually face-to-face then. You can still discuss the issues. I think it's just that you're used to having a get together and talking about it in the same physical location, but there is something else that you can replace it with. It's maybe not ideal and the best option, but it's better than not having it. And then what a Guy Coward like to know. Okay, I often find my team, quiet team members, to only start talking issues with me when others are raising it in the same meeting. How would you encourage the quiet team members to start speaking up? I think throwing to them, they may say they have nothing. Sometimes they go through others though. Sometimes those quiet team members find ways of getting their agenda through. So they'll find the people who can be their voice. And sometimes, you know, the people that speak up are sometimes the voice of other people. You can have a one-on-one, Vicky, maybe ring them up, ask them specific questions, or you can ask them in the meeting, you know, what's the issues with you? How's things going? How are you finding this? Don't ask yes, no questions. Yeah, or make it possible for them to send you suggestions afterwards. The anonymous suggestion option is always useful. So Google Forms is good for that. Yeah, that's just some ideas anyway.
Beauty. All right. Thanks so much for staying a little bit longer, Kath.
No problem at all.
And thanks everyone else for sending in so many good questions. We'll end them there, sorry. All right, well, I guess all that's left to say is, yeah, we'll get the slides and the webinar recording and a few interesting resources to you tomorrow. We'll send details as well if you want to have a chat about any of the study options available to you now. You know, might be a good time for some people to study. It might be the last thing on your mind as well. So whatever works. Thank you, Hannah, for hanging around and doing the chat at short notice, champion. Thank you, everyone, for coming along, and feel free to share this with anyone who you think might benefit from it. And of course, thank you so much, Kath, for coming along and running another session with us. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, Guy and Hannah, for all your wonderful support. And yeah, have a great night, everyone. And hopefully something's been useful from today. All right, see ya.